This is Radio TV Phoner Nut, and today we're going to attempt to bring this Califone 1410K classroom record player from 1979 back to life. Cosmetically, it's in decent shape. It's not perfect, but it's in above average shape. There's no school writing on it or no rusty handles or corner protectors, so that's good. Now, this was the lowest end Califone that you could buy at the time, as in no pause control, just strictly all phone, no spring-loaded feet under the bottom like the better ones have. Let's see, what else are we missing? Oh yes, this one uses a 5-watt amplifier as opposed to the 10-watt amplifiers used in the bigger ones, and the bigger ones have a 6x9-inch front-firing speaker. This one has a 4x10-inch speaker firing from the back. Now, one might ask, why would they put a rear-firing speaker in a record player? Well, in this case, probably so the operator could face the rear of the set towards the listening audience and operate the set from the front, is the only thing I can come up with. Now, this does have a metal platter and a metal tone arm. This is one of the last Caliphones, I believe, that has the metal platter. They went to plastic after this, and then by the late 80s they went to a DC motor and plastic drive mechanism, which was a nightmare. In fact, I'm getting so I won't even take those in anymore. I don't care how cheap they are. These old ones with the AC motor driven General Industries or Alliance mechanism are way better. Now, I've already peeked inside of this thing because I heard something rattling around inside, and this is what I found rattling around, this wire stripper. I guess whoever was working on this thing just left the thing in there and forgot to take it out. Well, he or she was probably so disgruntled over not being able to get it to work that they just left their wire stripper in there. Now, I have not even plugged this up, but here are the problems that I know we have. That turntable platter is wobbly and needs to be lubricated, and of course we'll do the whole drive mechanism while we're at it. I can tell the cartridge wires broke at some point, and that's a common problem on these. The wires soldered to the terminals on this flip over holder. When you flip it from LP to 70H, you flip the whole wires around, and I can't tell you how many of these I fixed that the wires would break, and you can tell someone attempted to fix this, but they were unsuccessful, and they made more of a mess than anything. Yeah, it's not focusing, but yeah, you get. And I noticed the speaker in the back, the terminal strip that's riveted to the speaker frame has come loose, so I gently disconnected the wires from the amplifier from it. And they'll have to fix that. Hopefully the voice coil is not open, because these speakers are getting hard to find. Yes, I can get 4x10-inch car speakers that are rated for a megawatt and cost more than the record player is probably worth, but it's just getting harder to find these high-efficient, lower wattage speakers that, like what was used in these record players. Here's the operating instructions inside the lid. Now, we had record players like this, or very similar to this, whenever I was in elementary school and junior high, but ours were the 1430Ks with the better amplifier and pause control. And just as a heads up, these are not horrible record players, but if you want something that really sounds the best, get a 1430K or higher model number. The 1420K is basically the same thing as this one with the addition of a pause control, and the 1430K is where you start with the decent amplifier, and I think the 1435K has variable pitch. The 1450K has separate bass and treble controls, and the 1455K has variable pitch. So that's your Califone model number breakdown. Alright, let's plug this up and just see what it does. I just want to see if it rotates and see if this track light is still good. This is nice. The ground plug prong hasn't been whacked off. That's one of my pet peeves when I get one of these with the ground pin whacked off. I can understand why people do it. You need to plug something in at the right now, but you only have a 2-prong outlet, no adapter available, but it just makes things more difficult for me at the whenever I get the equipment, because I have to either replace the plug or put a whole new power cord on it. On these, you need to set it to neutral when not in use, because this particular model doesn't have an idler wheel retract when you turn it off. The 1420 and higher numbers did, but not this one. Well, I see the track light still illuminates, so it's not burned out. And the platter rotates, but I can tell we don't have a lot of torque because I don't have to press very hard to get it to stop. So but I don't think the idler wheel has any bumps or dents in it, so that's good. That'll save me $30. All right, let's get this down to the workshop and do what needs to be done to it. Here's the speaker, and what's happened, this terminal strip has come unattached. But before we attach it, let's check it with an ohm meter and make sure we still have continuity here. And thank goodness we do. Okay, we have our speaker fixed and mounted back into the case. Yeah, that drive mechanism needs some help. Okay, I'm getting a little hum from the speaker, but nothing when I touch the tone arm wiring, so that tells me that most likely we have a break somewhere in the wire. Okay, let's look at our tone arm wire here. We have 3 wires here, a red, a white, and a braided shield wire. The red and the white wires solder directly to the cartridge holder, and then the shield wire connects to one of these screws on that holds the cartridge bracket holder in place, so that can make contact with the metal tone arm and prevent hum and static and other objectionable noises that would otherwise be present if this tone arm wasn't grounded. And it looks like we're going to have to stretch our cable out a little bit because it's not long enough to reach the cartridge holder. And of course this 89T cartridge is shot. Now normally I'd probably put a P228 fan steel cartridge in here, which is the old Varco TN4B equivalent, and try to modify the amp to get a little more gain out of it. But in this tone arm I really can't do that because of this little light at the end of the tone arm. I could sacrifice the light and put one in there, but a lot of people seem to like the light, so we'll leave the light alone, and we'll fix this for an 89T cartridge just like what originally came in it. Okay, we now have our cartridge holder installed, and I ran a couple of pieces of heat shrink tubing over the cartridge lead wires. That way when the cartridge is flipped, it won't put quite so much strain on the wires and possibly break them. Now, at one time there was a little solder lug that it went under one of these mounting screws that the shield wire was attached to. Well, that lug was nowhere to be found, so I just made one out of a piece of hookup wire that I tinned and bent it into the shape of a circle where I could attach it with a screw, and now it's in place where it needs to be. So now all we should have to do is fix the drive mechanism, clean it and lubricate it, and this record player ought to be good to go again. Okay, I installed one of my static LP78 varieties in here. Come in and take a look at your man. You'll be surprised what you might find. It actually doesn't sound too bad. It sounds better than a lot of these 1410s and 1420s that I've ran into, so. I made a discovery. I was looking around and found this tall bracket that accommodates the Chuo-Denshi Crosley style cartridge as well as the Fansteel P228 style cartridges, and I discovered that I can fit one of these into these types of Califone tone arms without it interfering with the track light, but I'm concerned that it might cause the cartridge to hang down a little low. But maybe the next one of these we get with a bad cartridge. Actually, I think there's already one here with a bad cartridge that we'll have to dig out one day. Maybe I'll order some P228 cartridges and we'll do a little experimentation. I don't know what would have to be done to the amplifier in these because I've never dug into one of these Califone amps that deep to see what needed to be done to give it a little extra gain, but most of these classroom models were designed for the 89T cartridge. And if you put anything in there with a lower output, it's going to sound weak and tinny unless you can do something to give that amp some more gain. I just wish somebody would start making the old style 89Ts with the LP tip on one side and the 78 tip on the other side. I can tell you, do not waste your money on these red single tip LP cartridges that are currently made because the compliance is not that great on them, which means they skip. They don't sound the best in the world, and when playing a stereo record, you only get half of the groove reproduced, whereas these older cartridges, they're mono, but they take the left and right channels and combine them together, so you're actually hearing both channels in mono through the speaker. Now, yes, these cartridges are not the most gentle on records, but when you get a good one that still has good compliance and all that, they can do pretty good. And this one, like I said, actually has the 3mm tip on the other side for 78 RPM. Here's a 78. Okay, getting ready to do the drive mechanism, we set our speed selector to neutral, and we'll gently pry off this E-clip with the screwdriver, and be careful because clips have a tendency to fly off to unknown parts. And in case I hadn't already mentioned it, I'd already lost one of the cartridge mounting screws. It fell off and hit the floor, and I spent what seemed like forever trying to find it. I found everything else on the floor that I didn't want and will never want. But that's the way it always goes. What you want, you'll never be able to find. What you don't want will always be there. So we'll pop this clip off and lift the platter off. If it doesn't lift off, tap it a few times with the spindle a few times with the butt end of a screwdriver, a mallet, or similar object, and that should break it loose. And now that we have the platter removed, we'll take our paper towel or cloth, dampened in 90% rubbing alcohol, and clean the inner rim of the platter thoroughly. And that'll get all any gunk or debris or oil or whatever off of the driving surface of the platter. And this is the black crap that came off on our paper towel. Most of that is whole rubber off of the idler wheel that made its way onto the platter. And when the inner rim of the platter gets all gunked up and dirty and possibly oily, you won't get good traction in severe circumstances. It will just barely rotate, if at all. So everything needs to be nice and clean and grippy, and so it'll have good traction. And one thing you want to remember, you don't want to get any kind of lubricant on the inner rim of the turntable platter, or on this motor capstan here, or on the surface of the rubber drive wheel, because even the slightest amount will cause problems. Now, in the course of cleaning and lubricating these things, it's probably going to happen. That's just the way it is. But if it does, just clean it off with a paper towel damped in alcohol, and that should take care of it. Now I want to remove this rubber drive wheel, and the way we do that is gently pry off this E-clip, and when you remove the clip, again use caution, and you'll notice some washers above the wheel, and when you remove the wheel you'll notice some washers under the wheel, and quite possibly one or more washers will remain stuck to the underside of the wheel. You want to keep up with how many washers go where so you can put everything back right. And the reason for the washers is so the wheel can be set to the right height to make the proper contact with these steps on the motor capstan here. Okay, one washer on top, and then like I said, some are probably going to stick to the bottom here, which is the case here because of the old grease. And the battery's fixing to die, so we're going to have to try to hurry this up. And we'll take our alcohol-soaked rag and clean this off. Take a Q-tip dipped in alcohol, run it through the center hole here, clean any gunk out of that. And then you'll want to carefully, very carefully, hold this down with one hand and use your screwdriver to pop this clip off with the other hand. Gently lift this assembly off, dismount this spring. Then once you get this assembly out, carefully remove this clip. Take that off, separate these two pieces, take your Q-tip dipped in alcohol and your rag and clean up everything really well, including run a Q-tip through the hole that this shaft here goes through, as well as the shaft here too. Clean all that out very thoroughly. Take your alcohol-soaked rag, clean all this up, and you'll want to clean, you'll notice this here, this is the grease they have on the slide that determines the, as you can see, it raises the idler wheel to the proper height. As you can tell, this is turned to, it's not really grease anymore, it's almost powder. You'll need to clean every bit of that off and re-lubricate that with a product I call Phono Lube. It's called Phono Lube. For cleaning the idler wheel surface, I like to use this stuff. It's called Rubber Renew, and my bottle's getting kind of low. Yes, this is for cleaning rubber wheels. This is not for getting extra life out of your birth control devices. So we'll apply some of that to a paper towel. Rub the surface of the wheel really good. You can see this one's kind of glazed, but there's no flat spots in it, so I think we can save this wheel. Other methods you can use is put a bolt through the center of the wheel, put the bolt in a drill, preferably a variable speed one, and run some sandpaper over it to take off the glaziness, but so far this works well for me. And if you need to get a replacement wheel, go to www.thevoiceofmusic.com. He rebuilds these for about $30, and if the wheel is past going, as in too much rubber worn off to use, or it's too hard and cracked, or it has dents in it, you can send this off and get a new wheel, or a rebuilt wheel I should say. And that's what came off of our idler wheel. And keep in mind, this is potent stuff. You really want to use it in a ventilated area if possible, because it does have an odor to it, and you'll never want to let the stuff get on the paint or the finish on whatever it is you're working on, because it will take that off too. Stuff makes a good paint stripper, although no more than they give you in that bottle. That would be an expensive way to strip paint. Okay, our wheel's been treated and cleaned. That's the gunk that came out of the center hole of the wheel. We just have it sitting over to the side. We won't need it again until we're ready to put it all back together. Now let's clean all this up. Okay, here's this piece that I was talking about removing, and I gently pry it off the clip. Sometimes there'll be a metal washer below the clip. Sometimes there'll be a metal washer below this piece here, so you want to make sure not to lose those. And here's my couple of little trays that I use keeping my parts in. You just don't want to let the parts lay on your workbench, because no matter how clean it is, which mine is far from clean right now, they will roll off and hit the floor and you'll never find them again. Okay, here our piece is separated. We're going to clean all of this with Q-tips and paper towels soaked in alcohol. Clean these holes out really good. Then we'll take a clean Q-tip and drip some zoom spout oil on it and just coat this shaft here. So when we put this back on, everything will move freely. And here's my lubricant applicator. The fuzzy end I use for the oil, and the non-fuzzy end I use when I want to apply phono lube to a certain area. Okay, so we applied some oil, the Q-tip, gently rubbed this shaft with it, slipped our piece back on there, put the clip back in place, and it moves nice and freely now. Now if you use too much oil, it's going to seep out from under here. You really don't want that to happen. If it does happen, just clean it up. You just need a little dab here. Now let's set this piece aside and clean all this crap up. Okay, that's all nice and clean, as good as we can get it. Now we'll take some phono lube and lightly apply a coating to this little step track here, as well as back here on this little stepped area, and that way everything will run smoother. And you might want to, you really don't need to put any here, although they had some grease slathered on here, but this is so loose fitting, it's really no big deal. You just really need to get it on here and on these little steps here, and then we'll take our Q-tips soaked in oil and rub this shaft down really good here. And here's the phono lube. Okay, this portion is done, and that's moving like it's supposed to. Okay, now that this is done, we need to address this dried up, lubricant, noisy spindle issue. And to do that, we need to get to the underside of the player, so we need to take this out and flip it up. And you'll see yet another E-clip that holds this in place, and you'll need to gently remove that. There might be a washer under that E-clip, and there might also be a washer at the end of this spindle that makes contact up here at the top. Don't lose track of either one of those two washers. Pull the spindle out, clean the spindle thoroughly with alcohol. Take a Q-tip, dip it down into the hole that the spindle goes down into. Clean that out thoroughly with alcohol until you get all the gunk. Here's our spindle, and yes, it's kind of gunked up and dried up. And there's our washer that I mentioned. So let's clean it up really well and clean the hole that the spindle slides in and re-lubricate with, I like to use a mixture of phono lube and zoom spout oil, and that way it'll turn nice and smooth. There's our spindle all cleaned up. Well, maybe not all cleaned up. Need to do a little more rubbing on it, but we're almost ready to put some lubricant on it. Okay, our spindle's back and it's turning nice and smooth now, no jerkiness. Now we need to take the motor apart and clean it and lubricate it. And while we're on that subject, let's talk about these rubber cone-shaped motor mounting grommets. There's 3 of them here. Now, these still appear to be in decent shape, so I'm going to leave them, and that's partly because I've run out of new ones. If I had some new ones here, I might replace them just out of principle, but there's really no need because these are still good. Now, some symptoms of bad motor mounts is, number 1, they get old and crumbly, and obviously when that happens, the motor needs to be replaced. Or sometimes they'll sag and cause the motor to drop, which will cause the idler wheel to land on the wrong portion of the motor capstan, or they'll just get all saggy and loose. Well, I just said saggy, didn't I? Another thing a saggy motor mount will cause is a floppy motor. This one's still nice and tight, you know, it's not flopping around excessively. There should be some play, but not a whole lot. Alright, in order to get the motor out, we need to remove 3 bolts, and you want to be careful because behind this bolt there's lock washers, or at least there should be, and then you've got some little spacers that go in through these motor mounting grommets, and you want to be careful not to lose any of that. And when you're taking these motors apart and putting them back together, it's best to do it when you're not going to have to worry about a phone ringing or the kids interrupting you, because you really need 3 hands to do this, and you don't want to make any mistakes. And you need a 5/16 wrench to get these bottom nuts off, and you might need a 1/4-inch nut driver to grab the ones from the top side to hold it in place so the whole bolt doesn't spin. Okay, here's our motor taken apart, and when you put it all back together, you want to make sure you have your motor assembly here in the right position. Don't accidentally flip it, because if you do, it'll run backwards, and yes, I've seen that happen. If this were really gunked up, I would soak this bottom bearing assembly and this whole assembly here in lacquer thinner, but this one's really not gunked up, and it's been my experience is these General Industries motors usually will run. It's the Alliance motors that get all gunked up and need to be soaked. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take our Q-tip dipped in alcohol, clean this bottom bushing out. Paper towel with alcohol on it. Let's clean this bottom shaft off and clean this top shaft off as best we can. Now, I could get this off if I had to. Well, not this one's would really be a pain in the butt because of this capstan thingy here for the 78. Some of them have a spring over it that you can get off, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. This is even a bigger pain in the butt, so you just have to clean this the best you can like it is, and then we'll oil our top and bottom bushings with zoom spout oil. If you can't get zoom spout in your area, get the blue 3-in-1 motor oil. Under no circumstances should you use the red 3-in-1 because that will gunk your motor up. You want the non-detergent blue stuff or the zoom spout oil that sometimes you have to order. As you can see, we got some crap out of the bottom bushing, so yeah, they do get kind of cruddy over the years. Okay, we have our motor shaft clean and oil applied. When you apply oil, you want to work it around a few times to let it get down in there. This thing has felt wicking around the bushings. You can't see it, but it's there, and that's what holds your oil, and then it seeps through the bearings to provide lubrication. Or the bushings, whatever you want to call them. And you want to do the same thing to this bottom bushing assembly. Okay, we have the motor back in, but we only have the 2 bolts here thumb tightened. And this is kind of a tricky process, putting all this back in here. That's when you really need the 3 hands. But as you're tightening these down, you want to wrap on the motor with butt end of a wrench or whatever, and that's to align your bearings. And as you're tightening these down, you want to constantly do that and check and make sure your rotor is turning freely. It should turn freely and not bind on anything. And then once everything's confirmed and turning freely and you have everything tightened down, then the motor should be good to go. You see, like right now, this is binding a little bit. It's turning, but it's not as free as it should be. So we'll just and that's better. So we'll just keep doing that and tightening out the bolts until we get them tight and everything's free. Okay, now would be a good time to clean your hands or wash your hands or whatever term you choose to use to get any oil off. Then we're going to take our rag dipped in alcohol, turn the unit on, and rub it against the motor capstan because you probably got some oil on that. There's just no way around it. And then we'll clean our fiber washers, put a little bit of oil on this idler wheel shaft, put our fiber washers back in place, put the wheel down on it, taking great care not to get anything on the rubber drive surface. Clip everything down, put the turntable back on, and it should be good to go. And here we are cleaning the motor capstan. Wouldn't get any possibility of any lubrication off of here. Okay, all we got to do is put the plighter back on, and if everything goes well, we'll have a drive mechanism that's working like it's supposed to. Okay, we have good torque now, even on the 16 RPM position. I'm having to press really hard, and it's still not stopping it completely, not like it was before. That I have you here forever by my side. clatter's a little bit off balance, but that sometimes happens with these. There's really nothing I can do about that. As long as it's not off balance enough where it's scraping the speed control lever, it's not really a big problem. Okay, we're working. And of course we clean the potentiometers with this stuff. Now we'll get us finished with a 78. Hope you got something out of all of this, and more to come later.
There are happy thoughts your heart to fill, near enough to make you cry. With every tear you've washed away.